My name is FC Hap'Chandler, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired. I served in England with the 8th Air Force. 2nd Air Division of the 8th Air Force consisted of 14 B-24 groups, all of which were based around Norwich. My first mission, believe it or not, was to fly to Southampton, where they put plywood in the bomb bays of our B-24s and loaded it with sacks of flowers. This was August 1944. I was told that the bakers of Paris had run out of flour, and it was our job to carry the flour bombs over to Orleans, where we landed. It had been liberated from the Luftwaffe, I think, about a week before. At any rate, I'll never forget the little Renault trucks and how carefully the Frenchmen took every scrap of that flour and headed to Paris. Later we went back to Southampton, and I flew 2 more missions carrying maps to Patton. He'd run off the maps, and these were artillery maps. Well, that started the war for me. In September of 1944, I went back to the 489th Bomb Group and started to fly bombing missions. The most notable mission, the one I remember very clearly, was Operation Market Garden. The B-24 was an excellent aerial truck, and they put plywood in the bomb bay again and loaded us with all kinds of supplies for the airborne. And if I recall correctly, that was the 101st Airborne that we resupplied. I went to an area near Eindhoven, and we were at about 500 feet. We flew across Holland. I could see the action very clearly. I remember the gliders, the parachutes on the ground, seeing some of the crashes. I recall that we had a sight when I was looking out the window at all these pretty Dutch girls were out waving flags in the middle of the street. And what I didn't observe was the Germans were on top of the buildings and in haystacks. All at once, holes started coming to the airplane. So I was very quick to put on my helmet, my flak suit again, and quit waving at the pretty girls. And when we got to the drop zone, they were supposed to have a radio beacon marker. Well, it was not there. So our fearless colonel took us around not once, not twice, but 3 times. And you know, that can be deadly, particularly at 500 feet. And the German fire was getting pretty intense on our group. So my pilot just dumped whatever we had. Fortunately, it went into Allied hands, I was told. And we peeled off and went back to England single ship. I thought we went over the Arnhem Bridge, but when I went back there some years later with my friends at Thomas's, I discovered it was the Nijmegen Bridge. At any rate, I remember a firefight on the bridge. I remember the Germans were still shooting at us when we left the Dutch coast. But I managed to survive that mission, and then there were, how many? 2, you got 33 to go. And I flew 18 missions with the 489th Bomb Group. They were stood down, so I had the option to go to another group and complete my combat tour, which was 35 missions. It was my good fortune to be assigned to what I regard as the finest B-24 group in England, the 491st Bomb Group ringmasters at North Pickenham in Norfolk. North Pickenham is a very substantial town of a couple of residences, a post office, and a farm. And we had about 2,500 Americans there at the time, so we kind of increased population for a while. I flew 17 missions from there in December, January, February, and March of 1944-45, most of them as a lead navigator. My job was to do pilotage, that is, to use a map to identify ground markers. And a B-24 would sit in the nose turret with a map and 2 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns, fortunately. But our job was to identify on the ground the initial point, which was at the point the bomb run began. I believe on September the 12th, I flew my first bombing mission against Germany. The target was Magdeburg, I was to go there 5 more times, 6 missions to Magdeburg, sometimes equals rigor mortis, but we were fortunate enough to get only battle damage. It was a heavily defended target on the Elbe River, about 60 miles south of Berlin. The first mission is memorable. I'll never forget the flak was bursting and airplanes exploding and parachutes in the air. And I recall I looked at the temperature gauge and it said 30 below zero, and I thought to myself, this is no place for a Georgia boy. Once we got the IP identified and made the proper turn, we were en route to the target, and that was a very, what's the word? Chilling is probably the best word. At any rate, there was no opportunity for us to do evasive action, which was our salvation from the anti-aircraft, really. We had to fly straight and level and hold formation because that determined the impact of the bombing on whatever target we were going against. It was the worst time in the mission. Sitting in the nose turret, if I could see the target, I'd communicated with the bombardier who had the Norden bomb sight, which was clutched into the autopilot. He had controlled the airplane, and I, in effect, was telling him what to do. And once he got the target in his telescopic sight, I simply followed him down. I have no remorse about the bombing, any of my bombing campaign. Hitler was out to change the world. Now, how a man who was obviously deranged did that, I have no explanation except there's evil in this world, and he was the essence of evil as far as I'm concerned. At any rate, what we did, unfortunately, had what is called collateral damage. And I have heard numbers like 500,000 German civilians died. I don't know how many died, but there was a substantial number. What we did was what we had to do, what we were told to do. And if the politicians made a mistake by designating those targets in the manner in which they attacked it, I think they're responsible. The crew with which I flew became one of the top lead crews in the 852nd Squadron of the 491st Bomb Group. They did a remarkable job. We had one of the best pilots I ever flew with, Eugene Scammahorn from Washington. A great crew. There are only 2 or 3 of us left at this point. The other's a tail gunner, Norman Johns, who lives in Minnesota. And Norman and I at a reunion say, well, Chandler saw what was going on, and I found out what happened after we left. Tail gunners usually did. In Norfolk, we have a memorial there in the Norwich Library, and we had the good fortune to have 2 sponsors for our group.
When we moved up into Norfolk and I heard about the Memorial Library, I found out there was nobody sort of looking after that particular airfield when any veteran came back to take them round. And that's how we came to meet Hap.
I can always remember at one of the groups that did come over, on Keith's Jeep, there must have been at least 14 or 15 of the veterans all having a wonderful ride, and it really was something to be seen.
It was the best of times, the worst of times. The camaraderie, the peer pressure, the fact that the American people were providing us with the best that America could produce by way of bombers and other equipment. The dedication of the ground crews was just remarkable. We would come back from Germany, literally shot to pieces, fortunate to be on the ground, 2 engines out, holes all over the airplane. The ground crew was simply like a football team. They were on that airplane immediately. And by the next morning, they'd changed an engine or two, and out we went again.